All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're taking a look at, well, a little bit of everything.
Yeah, we've got global politics, a little bit of economics, even some art and literature.
So kind of all over the place, but that's what makes these deep dives so fun, right? Finding those unexpected connections.
Exactly. Seeing how things that seem completely separate actually tie together. It's like, it's like that saying, everything's connected.
Totally. Like, okay, let's start with something pretty heavy, the situation in Israel and Gaza. The reports coming out from the Associated Press are just, well, they're really painting a stark picture. You got the ongoing military operations, urban warfare. It's a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah. And it's really hard to even grasp the scale of it sometimes.
Absolutely. And this isn't something that's just contained over there, right?
Yeah.
It has these ripple effects.
Oh, absolutely. And we see that reflected in like the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. They just released their World Economic Outlook, and they're being pretty cautious. Part of that is because of conflicts like what we're seeing in Israel and Gaza.
So they're basically saying these events are impacting the global economy.
Exactly. They're predicting global growth to stabilize around, 3.1% over the next few years. But that's still below what it was before the pandemic.
So even though it sounds like things are, sort of getting back on track,
Yeah.
there are still these underlying factors holding things back.
Right. Conflicts, instability, these things all play a role. And it kind of brings us to another global challenge, one that, maybe doesn't seem immediately connected, but stick with me. Climate change.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going with this. Everything's connected.
Right. And there's this artist, Alicia Park, who's doing some really fascinating work on this. Her exhibit at the Venice Biennale, it's been getting a lot of buzz.
Oh, yeah, I read about that in the art newspaper. It's not just about, like, showing the effects of climate change, right? It's about resilience.
Exactly. She's got these interactive installations, like there's one that simulates different climate scenarios, and it forces you to make choices. Like, how do you allocate resources? How do you build a community that can withstand these changes? It really makes you think.
It's like she's using art to, like, hold up a mirror to society and say, hey, this is what we're facing. What are we going to do about it?
Exactly. And speaking of tackling complex issues, have you heard about the Nobel Prize in Literature?
Oh, yeah. Haruki Murakami. I was so excited when I heard that.
He's such a master of his craft. His books, they're not always the easiest reads, but they really stay with you.
They're so layered, like there's the magical realism, but underneath that, there's this deep exploration of human experience, the things we all grapple with.
Right. And it's interesting because you have Alicia Park using art to confront climate change, and then you have Murakami using literature to explore these internal landscapes. And it's like they're both dealing with these huge universal challenges in their own ways.
It's like they're both saying, hey, look, the world is complex, but there's beauty and meaning to be found even in the midst of that complexity.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really powerful message, especially when you think about everything else we've talked about today, the conflict in Israel and Gaza, the global economic outlook, climate change. These are all things that can feel really overwhelming.
Absolutely. So if we try to step back and look at the big picture, what's the takeaway here? What are we learning by looking at these seemingly disparate things together?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that it sounds cliche, but everything really is connected. Political conflicts, economic instability, climate change, they all influence each other. They're not happening in a vacuum.
It's like that butterfly effect thing.
Yeah.
One small change in one place can have these huge consequences somewhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to not just focus on these things in isolation. We need to understand the connections, the web of relationships, if we want to find real solutions.
Wow. Okay. So we covered a lot of ground today. We talked about war, the global economy, art, literature, and, what ties it all together. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But hopefully it helps to see these connections, to understand that even though the world can be a really messy place, there are people out there trying to make sense of it, trying to find meaning and beauty and maybe even offer some hope.
It definitely gives you something to think about.
Absolutely. And as you go about your day, maybe think about this. You know how Murakami has this way of finding the extraordinary in the ordinary? Well, how can we do that in our own lives? How can we take these complex global issues and find ways to connect with them on a personal level, to find meaning and maybe even action?
That's a great question. And on that note, thank you for joining us for another deep dive.
Yes, thank you for listening. Keep exploring, keep connecting the dots, and keep those questions coming.
Until next time.